1857. It is 3 years before Lincoln is elected to his first term. Dred Scott was a Virginia slave. He sued his owner for his freedom in court, and he won it. That didn't matter. They appealed it. They took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. This is what the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court wrote about Dred Scott. I quote, "These are not my words. A free Negro of the African race whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves is not a citizen within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States." I quote, "The change in public opinion and feeling in relation to the African race, which has taken place since the adoption of the Constitution, cannot change its construction and meaning, and must be constructed and administered now according to its true meaning and intention when it was first formed and adopted." I quote the Supreme Court Justice, "The Constitution of the United States recognizes slaves as property and pledges the federal government to protect it, and Congress cannot exercise any more authority over property of that description than it may constitutionally exercise over property of any other kind." The Supreme Court Justice of the United States continues, "The language of the Declaration of Independence is equally conclusive, and it begins by declaring that when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation." It then proceeds to say, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their powers, their just powers, from the consent of the governed." Listen to the words of the Supreme Court Justice of the United States as he talks to a slave in 1857. I'm quoting here. The general words above quoted would seem to embrace the whole human family, and if they were used in a similar instrument at this day, would be so understood. But it is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included, and formed no part of the people who framed and adopted this declaration. For if the language as understood in that day would embrace them, the conduct of distinguished men who framed the Declaration of Independence would have been utterly and flagrantly inconsistent. Let me repeat. The conduct of the distinguished men who framed the Declaration of Independence would have been utterly and flagrantly inconsistent with the principles they asserted. And instead of the sympathy of mankind, to which they so confidently appeal, they would have deserved and received universal rebuke and reprobation, unquote. This is the spirit of the Confederacy. It was so very clearly spelled out to the world and humanity who lived in the USA. They rose up. They said enough was enough. Enough wasn't enough. This break in the country has been characterized as North versus South, the Union versus the Confederacy. It's framed this way to lend credence to these racists and legitimacy to the traitorous people who wanted to own Black Americans so they can make money. The North and the Union were America. They were not the North. They were not the Union. They were the United States of America. The 11 states of the Confederate States of America left America. November 6, 1860, Lincoln is elected, even though 10 states did not include him on the ballot. 6 weeks later, South Carolina seceded from America with these words: by a vote of 169 to 0. South Carolina legislature enacts an ordinance that the Union, now subsisting between South Carolina and other states, under the name the United States of America, is dissolved. January 1861, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas seceded from America. They didn't secede from the Union. They left this country. February 1861. Those states combined to form the Confederate States of America, an entirely different nation. They elected Jefferson Davis as their president. April 12, 1861. Fort Sumter. Confederate forces fired shots at the fort, and the American troops surrendered. This sparked the Civil War. It lasted 4 years. 5 days later, Virginia seceded from America and joined the Confederacy. May and June of 1861, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, they followed suit. 1862, Congress outlawed slavery. 1863, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that as of January 1st, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. 1864, Confederate troops led by General Nathan Bedford Forrest massacred captured African American soldiers at Fort Pillow, Tennessee. 1864, Abraham Lincoln was elected to his second term. General Lee surrendered. The Civil War ended, and the Confederacy of 11 states ended. Lincoln was assassinated 5 days later. But racism refused to die. After the Civil War ended, America was left with 4 million slaves and 11 rebellious states. There was a 10-year period after the Civil War where black people voted. Black participated in the government. But Reconstruction failed in a decade because of the KKK. Slavery ruled the economy and law in our land for 250 years. The Confederacy lasted 1861 to 1865. That nation existed for 4 years. They pulled their flag off a Capitol House just a couple of months ago. Abraham Lincoln got shot 3 days after wanting to give the vote to black people. All those former Confederate soldiers came home to work as sheriffs and judges and lawyers, police and mayors. They began to use their power to shape and make an insidious series of laws and policies that made it difficult for African Americans to win court cases, ensured they were subject to black codes and work contracts and supervision of white people and slave owners. They did this for the economic benefit of exploiting them for their labor and controlling their behavior. These evil men came back from the Civil War to their homes. They began to use their power to enact black codes across the South as a legal way to ensure black citizens were available as a cheap labor force, absolutely including cheap child labor. Many states required blacks to sign yearly labor contracts, and blacks who refused were arrested and fined. They were forced into unpaid labor camps. They took their voting rights away. They controlled where they could live. They controlled how they could travel. 4 million people, free slaves, with no land, no money, no education. They made it illegal for them to learn to read. They made it illegal for you to teach them what A sounded like. All they gave them were scars and strength. It's beaten into their flesh for 250 years before Emancipation. The Christmas Eve after the Civil War ended, in Pulaski, Tennessee, the Ku Klux Klan was formed. Merry Christmas, America! The KKK used cowardice